Hello and welcome to this panel, Career Paths, Different Roles in the Industry at EGX Digital 2020. This panel was organised through BAFTA, which myself and all the panellists are a part of. My name is Sophie Knowles. I will be the host moderator of this panel. I am a 3D generalist. I work for Playdio, which is a mobile game studio in the UK, in London. As a 3D generalist, I do a multitude of things, animation modeling, rigging, and all that jazz. Someone else want to introduce themselves? Chris.
Yeah, thanks for that, Soph. So my name is Chris Phillip. I am the event coordinator at the Tentacle Zone by Payload Studios, and I'm also the co-founder of Game Anglia. With my Tentacle Zone hat on, we put on events for our residents in our co-working space in London, and now remotely for the last several months. And basically, my role is to help the residents achieve the best they can be by bringing together industry experts and making sure that we do relevant talks. And also I manage the community in terms of communicating with them and making sure that they talk to each other and do knowledge transfer, which also fits well with my other hat, where we create events for the young people and students in the east of England with the Game Anglia hat on, to help them, to help young game developers kind of like achieve their best and get started within the games industry.
Great, Katie, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Katie Ellis. I'm marketing lead at Jugglefish. My role is kind of not just marketing, but also publishing too. So it covers everything from when we first bring a game in, pre-announcement and everything, working with them to make sure that the game development goes smoothly, that the game happens, I guess, and also then right through to the marketing of it to make sure you've heard of it. There's 1,000,001 stages in between that, and it's often not always what you'd expect. It's definitely a role with a lot of different hats. I guess a bit like Chris, we do events as well, social, product management, lots of things I'm probably forgetting. But yeah, that's about it.
Kirsty, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kirsty Gilmore, and I'm a freelance voice director and casting director for games, and also a sound designer. Most recently, I've been working as the voice director for Destruction All Stars for Lucid Games, and also for a number of titles through Pitstop Productions, which I can't talk about at all. As a freelancer, I work for a lot of different companies. My role encompasses everything from liaising with different studios and companies about what they're looking for in terms of voice actors, and also performance and motion capture actors, although I'm more of a voice director. So through the casting process, but also through to the end product in terms of voice direction and directing the voice sessions. Also I do a lot of liaising with producers and with writers. I'm involved in a lot of different steps of the process, talking to people about the best way of capturing and implementing the best voice and performances for their games. Outside of the games industry, I also work as a voice and casting director for animation and audio drama, and also as a sound designer across a load of different areas, but mainly at the moment for audio drama. That's me.
Great, thanks everyone. So we've got a good range of different jobs here. I wanted to ask, we all know kind of like games are made, you start with like, pre-production, you get concepts, you get a prototype, you get production, whether, the game's made, you get sort of like post-production, like bug fixing, and you get sort of post-release support. And you also have so many game roles that are kind of out of the sort of like classic production line of things. Whereabouts in all of these are you most situated, or are you, yeah? Katie, let's start with you.
Okay, I think mine's probably more, I guess it really varies because it depends on what point we sign a game as a publisher, or from our development side, as Chocofish is also a developer, you know, it's right from the inception of someone decides, oh, let's make a game about this, or this would be a really cool thing. So it's very much a journey throughout the whole game production, and obviously throughout the rest of its life too, not just when the game launches. You know, you've got to be there to see it through for the next foreseeable years while it's still relevant. It totally depends at which point we can kind of come into different parts of the game's life. You know, from a kind of marketing standpoint, it's always awesome to be with the game for the full journey. You know, when it's sometimes when it's like not even announced, or when there's just a very like small cool idea that somebody's thought of, because that's when you can really shape things. You know, you can help shape the narrative in terms of how you present the game, the copywriting, everything like the logo. All of that is part of presenting a game to the world, but not also to players and press, but most importantly to like partners, you know, like talking to Nintendo or PlayStation, presenting that game. So publishing and marketing is kind of all part of that massive journey. But equally, you know, a lot of people come in just before they want to launch their game. You know, they've done all that work, they're right at the end of it, and they just want somebody to kind of help and be like, come on, can you, you know, I've got this awesome game, I just want people to hear about it. How can I kind of get it across the line? So yeah, it's a really interesting role because you just see so many games at so many different stages. You might be like Kirsty was hinting at before, working on a game which you can't talk about for a long time, you know, and you've kind of put it under wraps for years, and you're part of that journey that people don't see like 70% of, you know, they see the last 20% of it. So yeah, it's a very wide-ranging.
That's so interesting to be able to see everything in you know, all its little stages. Chris, how about you?
So events, as Katie mentioned as well, are a really big field, and they're quite wide. So you could be, generally you're going to be helping people. That's why I do it, and that's what I like to do. Now, what form that's going to take is dependent on the type of your role, and it's going to depend a lot on the people who you're working with. So, for example, we together with some of the team at Payload Studios, we put together social events which help people kind of like get together and help teams really mesh properly, especially when you're working within a co-working space. What you want to do is get people to know each other, because that way you can foster collaboration, right? Teamwork and communication are really important within any team of game developers. And then, so that's a more social aspect of things. But then you can also have a look at some of what I do and some of what the Tentacle Zone does as a part of business development, and as a part of key skill and knowledge development. So, for example, just the other day we had a chat about with an external developer, someone who we knew from experience, about putting together free-to-play games for Steam. So we got together and we chatted about best ways to work with your community on Steam, best ways to develop monetization strategies which don't feel predatory for free-to-play games, especially on Steam, where you have certain characteristics of the community. Another week we might have a chat about what it's like to publish games in China and what processes you need to go through in order to get there. Another week it might be that we talk about leadership and how to scale, the challenges of scaling up of your company as a company founder. So it's helping people achieve their best potential through knowing people, or at least knowing where to find the people that know how to answer those questions and surmount those challenges, and then getting everybody in a room, in a virtual room in this case, and helping them share that knowledge. Because a lot of the time game developers won't, even if they have like a lot of knowledge, they won't necessarily know how to help each other. So that's where also I come in as a facilitator to help them talk about those problems and not veer off the path too much. So I guess that's kind of where my job fits in the grand scheme of things. In terms of where it fits within the production cycle, as Katie said as well, it's all over the place. It might be that you just started your company and you don't know how to make a business plan, and we help you out. Or it might be that you have a very successful game on Android, but you want to port it to PC, and we know the right people to help you to help you start that process. So it's it doesn't necessarily fit in a specific stage. It could be anywhere.
Yeah, it's really great. I know I've certainly found games events very helpful my whole career, whether it's finding people or just getting extra knowledge and learning about things that I never knew from, people just talking about their own specialty. Kirsty.
Well, a little bit like what Katie and Chris said. It kind of depends on the project and it depends on the game. I would say that I get involved at the point when a studio decides that they want voicing for their game, and that might be something they decide on very early on. If it's a game that's particularly character driven or particularly narrative driven, and they've decided that they definitely want their characters to have voices, so that might be quite an early decision. Or it might end up at the other end, where they decide that they want to add voiceover, they want to add performance to the game quite late. I would say that the majority of what I do, I've worked on both ends of the spectrum, but especially when I'm involved with mocap and performance capture, it's usually happening earlier on. I'm usually involved with earlier on in the process, because that's something when you decide to invest in mocap and performance capture, that means that there's a lot more moving pieces. You have to get cinematics involved often, you have to get animation obviously quite heavily involved, so that becomes much more of a combined effort. But if it's a game where it's maybe just narration or it's just barks of some sort, then that might be something further down the process, because it's not as they do, and I find that a lot of the character development, a lot of the game development has happened before they add voiceover. So it's definitely in the production, mainly production with a bit of pre-production. I prefer to be, like, I think any kind of creative, I'd prefer to be involved in the process earlier than possible, because I think if you are going to give voice and performance, if you are going to have those elements in your game, then it's important to understand what you need, what's available for you within your budget, and what you would like, what you can, what will voice or performance add to your game, what roles might need it, what roles might not, and what you're looking for. In terms of what might fit best for your game. So I would say that it's one of the things about voice direction in games is that it's still quite new within games, just to have a voice director and to have we've had acting in voice games for a long time, but to have a role where people go on and are actually voice directors. We still have a lot of people who are sound designers who direct, who are writers who direct, and that's all great. But to have people who are dedicated voice directors and dedicated performance directors in particular is still quite new. So we're still, I think some games that I go to, if it's an established studio and they've worked with voiceover before, then they're very much like, this is how much we think we're going to need. They've got a broad idea. These are the kind of characters we think we are going to voice, and that will expand, contract, mainly expand, usually expand, as the game goes on. But there are definitely studios where they're like, look, we've never used voiceover before. We've no idea. Where do we start from there? So it's it's still something that's still new to companies. They're still not sure when they need it. So that's when you get a lot of like really last minute, oh God, we really want to add a voiceover element to this. Is 2 weeks enough to capture 20, to capture things? Is that going to, kind of thing, which is fine. So I would say, yeah, it varies. But the bigger the game is, the more committed they are to, like, the more they know that they're going to have voiceover performance, and the earlier then I will get involved in the process, I would say.
Do you find generally studios are getting better at bringing you in early, or is it still just like some bring you at the right time, some it's a mad rush, or?
Oh, they're getting better. I think what's happening, which is a good thing, is that game players are being more picky about performances. And that has a knock-on effect with studios going, oh, maybe we should invest a bit more time and money in getting people, actors, and not just our mates, to voice stuff. And then that kind of feeds on, kind of connects down the chain where they go, oh, well, maybe we should think about bringing in a specialist who can actually deal with that sort of thing. So I would say, yeah, the more demand, the more people expect higher standards from games, then yes, I get a bit further involved. But you know, as we all know, games is a really big wide world. So you have there's a massive spectrum. I think that I'm finding that people are more understanding, or should I say more willing, even if they don't really understand what I do, they're more willing to listen to a voice director or performance director's perspective and what they can add. So I find people are a bit more like, oh yes, actually you are an expert on this. They're more willing to listen. Whether or not they bring me in earlier in the process, yeah, kind of depends on the game. But I know they appreciate the role more, which is definitely a good thing.
Yeah, I think definitely appreciation is needed for all of us, and not being brought in and expected to do miracle work. I've had some similar experiences with the animation work I do, where I'm brought in right at the end because you can get some really great placeholder animation, and much like placeholder voice, it's great until it's not great. And then they bring in the professionals, and hopefully I can fix it. So myself, as a generalist, which basically just means I'm a jack of all trades, so I do a whole load of different things. Normally I'm working, in the sort of heart of production, doing animations or modeling or whatever it is that the particular game and job needs from me. But also generalists are very good in pre-production, making prototypes, because generally generalists are good at jumping between different things, whereas people who are more focused on one thing aren't. You definitely need those people who are just the one thing, because they're going to be much better than me, who is going to do a little bit of everything. I guess it also, as a generalist, depending on what I'm doing, it really depends on when I'm needed. But normally, production, and normally in small teams who don't particularly need a dedicated modeler or rigger or animator. So let's talk about our jobs again. I kind of already started on this. Sort of like any misconceptions about our jobs, our roles, and people making assumptions that aren't quite true. Maybe because what our role is slightly different in another industry. If people always ask you a question, you're always tired of answering because they always ask the same thing. So Chris.
So on my side, I'm never tired of answering questions. I'm always happy to answer questions, especially if those questions come from people who want to know more or want to come into the games industry. In terms of misconceptions, I think the biggest one that I've had is that people who work events or these types of support roles, as they're usually seen, don't necessarily come from the games industry, and I think that's probably the biggest one. On my side, I come from like game design and game producing, and it just turned out that I really like events because they have a shorter lifespan than a game. So I can produce an event in 3 months and deliver it, and that's really cool. As opposed to working for a few years on something and then having it be canned by somebody way above me in the decision chain. And I think that that's probably the biggest one. So yeah, people who work in events, they are passionate about games. They might have worked in games as well. Certainly, so the Tentacle Zone also has an exhibition arm. That's how it usually that's how it initially started, way back in 2015 or 2016, and the person who started that or who's taking care of the shows like EGX, the Tentacle Zone at EGX or at Insomnia, Rob Kinder. He's our head of publishing. He's our publishing director. Sorry. So he knows games, he breathes games, and he works very closely with indies, and that's what allowed him a lot of the contacts and a lot of the, at the end of the day, product development and service development decisions that were made in order to support indies and put together the Tentacle Zone at events. And he's still doing his day job as a publishing director in addition to putting together the Tentacle Zone at shows. So yeah, that's probably the biggest one from my side.
Great. What about you, Kirsty?
I think probably the biggest misconception is that you don't need a director, a voice director, a performance director on games. That's probably the biggest one I've come across, that people say, oh, can't you just, do you need somebody who's actually going to be dedicated directing it? Can't the actors direct themselves? Or can't just one of the producers do it, or one of the writers do it? And I think while people who are very much, writers can make excellent voice directors, and sound designers can make excellent voice directors, but the assumption that anybody can do the job, I think, is the big thing, because a lot of the games industry doesn't really, there's just that misconception as to what acting is and how to get a good performance, and the fact that if you want nuanced performances and you want to bring a character to life, you do need somebody there to shape the performance. It's not just a case of chucking the script at the actor and getting them to just say the words in a nice way. So I think that's the biggest misconception, is people saying, well, do we really need it? And so I spend not that much time anymore. I'm fortunate at the moment actually to work on games where that's already established. They've already established they need one. But a lot of the time, I think it's when I talk to indies who are like, do I really need a voice director? And I would say, well, how important is the voice performance, the acting, for you to tell your story? So if it is important for you, then you need to invest in someone that is going to shape the story for you. And each of the individual actors, even if you've got say 2 actors on a game, or you've got like 800 characters in a game, and 80, 90, whatever, 100 actors or whatever you have, the voice director will hopefully have an overview of what the game is and how the voice performance fits in the story, and they can give context. You can't expect each of your individual actors to know how the game fits together. You can't expect them to know that in this particular, you can't expect them to know what barks are. You can't expect them to know how gameplay dialogue differs from cinematic dialogue. And that's one of where you need an overall view of somebody to come in and go, actually, do you know what, we can't, the way you've said that line there isn't going to work, because that's a piece of information that at this point in time the player doesn't know. So you can't give too much away at that point. We're going to have to redo. We're going to redo that in a way that suggests it, but doesn't say it. We don't want to hint at it too much. Or right at this point, you're being very confessional about it. This is the big dramatic moment, so we need to put a little bit more into it. And this line is pretty much exactly the way you just did the previous line. It's just a different branching option. So we're going to use exactly the same intention. It just depends on what the player chooses to do. And you need that to guide. I mean, a lot of actors do play games, which is brilliant, but a load of actors don't. And, I deal with actors who come from theatre, who come from screen acting, and they don't, game and voice acting to them is another job, but they don't understand, they say, can I get a script? And I'm like, no. Not the full script anyway, that's thousands of pages, we can't give you that, but I can guide you through and tell you how your bit works in it. And so I do a lot of when I do have to explain it to people, I think that's probably the biggest misconception, just how much value a voice director gives to a game and what their role is. I don't think there's any questions that I get tired of answering for people. Like Chris, I'm really happy to talk to people who want to get into games. I would say occasionally I get a little bit tired about answering questions from actors, because they just ask, how do I work in games? which is the same, so that's a question with a whole lot of different things. But just in general, if developers want to say, how do I add voice? What do I need to do to put voice acting in my game? How do I get actors? Where do I find them? How do I really, really need this specific voice. How do I find them? Very, very happy to talk to them about that. I don't get tired about doing about that. I guess like all of us, we get, you get a bit tired of people are saying that your job's not necessary, which I do get occasionally. And that's always a little bit wearing. But again, I would say, how much value do you want the performance in your game to have? If you are willing just to have, if the voiceover doesn't mean that much to you, then don't invest in a voice director. If you want your voice acting to bring another element to your game, to the gameplay experience, then invest in someone who's going to bring the best out of your actors, who's going to connect all the dots, who's going to give you a cohesive performance across characters. Yeah,
super fascinating. Katie.
Yeah, I think there's loads of common misconceptions in marketing and publishing. I think it's widely misunderstood. But in terms of marketing, people often think, it's just throwing money at Reddit, like ad spend. Lots of people just think, tweet something. Marketing is just tweeting, right? There's a lot of misconceptions about that. Publishing even more so. Publishing, the big thing is, what do they even do? What's the publisher even do? Don't they just take a cut? And that's, I think I could probably do a whole talk separately on the small little things, that and many different things that involve marketing and publishing. But I guess the big answer to it is, marketing isn't just tweeting. It's how you say it, it's how you deliver it, where you deliver it, who you talk to, why you're talking to them. It's many multifaceted things across many different platforms that don't always suit each game. You could be doing something on Twitter which doesn't work for Twitter. It should be on Instagram, but that's just social. Marketing, it could be so many. It's all about branding and everything else. Publishing, lots of people think it's just, don't you just get age ratings? That's a big one. People just think marketing is talking to Peggy and slapping a logo on a box, rather than the long progress of working with a game to make sure that it's bug free, that it plays well, that people enjoy it, like giving developers honest feedback, working with them on a process about how you position it on a store, making people interested, talking to press, talking to influencers, talking to platform holders, also getting age ratings, and other bits like that. I think it's one of those things which totally depends as well on what a game team needs. So some people, for them, it might just be they need money, and that's fine. Some people just need money from a publisher and want to do everything themselves. But publishing is so much of just taking work away from developers. They can just develop their games. They don't want to be thinking about legal contracts or planning their social campaigns or sitting on Photoshop making really pretty GIFs. They want to be actually making the game. So that's a lot of I guess a big question is what do you do? That's the most common question. I think the other big question I get a lot at game shows in particular, Chris might have this, is I released my game like a month ago. I didn't get very many sales. How do I market it? And that's one of my favorite ones. And I normally say, should probably have looked at marketing about 10 months ago, maybe longer. But yeah, I think a lot of people, that's the real big benefit of thinking about your marketing campaign is I think a lot of us have been kind of hinting, is getting in early and making all of those different facets of game development earlier in the process, really thinking ahead to what you need and what's important for your game. It might be your game is a really fantastic one that's really good at word of mouth, and actually you don't need to do massive prep, or maybe it's really story based and you don't want to be sharing too much information like too early on. So yeah, it totally depends.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think there's always that rather annoying discussion that comes around every now and again of like who counts as a game dev and who doesn't, which I think we can all just like roll our eyes at, because if you're help the game in any way and help the devs and, help it, coming, to fruition so that we can all play these wonderful things. You're a dev, like, it's not just programmers, artists and all that. Yeah, I guess for myself, the complicated thing about a generalist is there's lots of different types of generalists. I think when people are, studying at university or whatever, they're told to be, T-shaped, so they know a lot of one thing and a bit of two things. And generalists are normally octopus-shaped. So we're always a sort of like mangle of so many different skills, probably because I have a very short attention span. I'm just like, oh, I could learn this thing now. So I guess it's sort of like all generalists don't do the same thing. I'll be contacted about a game that needs something, and I'll look at it and think, they'll say, yo, can you do this particular thing? I'll have to really think like, yes, and just wing it. It's probably bad advice, but just say yes and wing it. We have Google. So we've all been in the games industry for a little while. How has everyone's the role of that they've been doing in their career changed? Like personally, like going from job to job, like has it evolved from starting at one thing? Like Chris, you said you were making games and then you moved on. And also the particular role you do, how has that changed over time? Like, is there new software or new tasks, or you're expected to do something that you weren't always expected to do? Well, Chris, let's start with you.
So, yeah, I took a very roundabout way around the games industry. So I studied games at the University of Suffolk. Then I worked as a game designer for Ubisoft, which was really cool to see, exactly what you're talking about, a type of environment where hyper specialization is encouraged. So if you want to know the guy who does all of the mountains and the snow in Ubisoft, there is the one guy who does them all. It's the same with like vehicles. There's a whole studio that does vehicles, and it's a Ubisoft studio that does just every vehicle has been touched by them or has their systems. And then I moved on to be a product manager with a company that was leveraging a lot gamified apps a lot in transport. And while I was doing that, I also worked on a couple of indie games as a producer because product manager and producer have a lot of overlap between them. And a lot of the time that means just making sure people are on track and that everything works as it's supposed to the deadlines and to the budgets that you have. And then during that, I also started Game Anglia. Basically, I had a lot of time. I had so much free time. That's no longer the case right now. And then I moved on as a product manager within an influencer marketing company, which gave me a very good understanding of working with stakeholders and working with the types of very early stage products and technologies. Like we were trying to do some really fancy stuff around analyzing influencer soft skills just by looking at their videos and analyzing their videos, and like the modularity of their voices, how much they smiled, how good their video quality was, and things like that, which was really cool. And then I started the job that I'm currently in with the Tentacle Zone and with Payload Studios. So throughout this, I learned a lot. And I can honestly say they all kind of fit into each other. From my side, where I am now, what helped me the most was that I ended up meeting a lot of people from a variety of fields. So if I want to bring somebody in to talk about leadership, I not only have access to the leads that I worked with or with the studio heads from the indie studios that I collaborated with, but I also have people who worked in tech and other similar adjacent fields. And that really helped in terms of how I've seen the different disciplines evolve. I would say from a game design point of view, it helps a lot if you're technical, if you can make your own prototypes, And that's something that we weren't necessarily taught at uni, where it was just like, oh yeah, you're going to be balancing sheets and that's it. Or it wasn't even the case at Ubisoft, where it was basically balancing sheets and making PowerPoint presentations, and that was like your whole life was basically Microsoft Office. But then as you start going into small companies, the types that Katie works with, for example, it's really useful if you're a technical designer and if you can actually put together a prototype in Unity, if you can work with blueprints and things like that. From a producer point of view, I think and product management, Katie can also share her thoughts on that. But I've seen a lot of emphasis on actually being able to motivate teams, being able to shift your priorities from a product mindset where it's like, we need to make this game by date X, and I don't care if I need to like have you all here working overtime and hire 10 more juniors and just burn them out and then throw them by the wayside. And it's got into a much more people focused mindset where it's like, well, let's make sure that the team can deliver, because that it's their idea, it's their product, it's their game, and that's where that's where the value is. It's within the people. It's not within a bloody spreadsheet, although it's really good to know spreadsheets as well. And then lastly, from the events point of view, I think there's been a lot more focus on the visitor or personal customer experience and accessibility, and that's great. That's throughout the industry, and that's really great to see that. So when we were doing the last Game Anglia event that was in person, which was in late 2019, we focused a lot on making sure that the experience was as accessible as possible, that we had everything closed captioned as much as possible, that we then took the videos and put them up on YouTube, and then try to signal that to signpost that as much as possible. And we thought a lot more about what the whole experience for the students, for the customers at the end of the day was going to be, although the students themselves didn't pay, but yeah, we see them as customers. That's kind of where I'm at, if that answers your question, Saf. Sorry, it was very roundabout.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Katie, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I think you said about talking about the whole journey, so I'll try and remember. I guess I started off in a weird way as well. I actually went to uni to do history, so completely unrelated. I just liked writing, really, and wanted to do more of that. So not really particularly channeled at that point. But throughout uni as well, I really enjoyed games and writing. So I also wrote for some websites and like gaming websites, like Push Square and Nintendo Life, sorry. And so yeah, I was kind of already at that point building contacts, making relationships, just practicing writing really. And copywriting is one of those things which is incredibly helpful for so many different jobs. And just being able to eloquently write emails is a very underrated task and skill. I guess after uni, I then I started working in events as well. Actually, I worked in a gaming events specialist kind of company. So we produced events all around the world for PlayStation. So things like E3, Gamescom, Paris Games Week, EGX, all those kind of things. And that also was a lot of emailing, and but also time management, planning, budget management, creative ideas. You've got to really like, you get kind of briefed on a game and you have to kind of realize it in a kind of an experiential and like really visual, amazing way. And something which creates the best for the demo. So maybe you have a demo where it's not actually that hands-on yet, but you've got to make it really feel like the player's immersed in playing it. And so all kind of those many different facets. And then at that point I decided, I love games. I love producing these events, but unlike what Chris was saying, I was heartbroken that I would produce an event and then it would be torn down at the end of a weekend, and you'd see all my work being like shredded and thrown in a recycling tip. And I just wanted to be involved more. I was like, I get to make these amazing relationships with developers and publishers and stuff like that. And I get to see them through different stages of their release, producing these events for them. But I never really get to leave my mark on the game. So that's when I started looking into publishing and marketing. because, you know, it's kind of selling your game, but in a different way. Events are still involved, but it's all of those same transferable skills, like how do I take the best and most exciting elements of a game and portray it visually, or, you know, convey information to the player in a very short space of time that you've got their attention. So it's just kind of reworking those skills in a different way. I guess now a lot more of the focus, I think Chris was talking about, is actually looking after teams and kind of being a calming voice or excitable voice for what they're doing. You know, a lot of the times they just kind of want reassurance on what they're doing. And they might send you a build and they'll be like, oh, I don't know if it's going anywhere. I don't know what I'm doing. And you play like, this is awesome. You know, and kind of like, you know, being there to kind of as a voice, because so many of these teams are just very small groups of people who may never have made a game before, or they don't have a lot of experience on their going out on their own. And this is their big dream project, their one thing they want to do. So being part of that journey and not just doing all of like the product management and marketing side, but being more of a person, you know, and communicating with them is so important. And I think really not talked about part of publishing and marketing. I guess how things have changed, I think definitely there's been a big change between classic, what you see as publishing in terms of like the big studios, massive budgets, crunching, you know, and all that kind of stuff. And now it's a lot more chill. There's a lot more boutique agencies and publishing teams and partners, people who just want to help out and work on cool projects and do small stuff, not be as complete ownership of things as they used to be, which is awesome. I think things are moving in a pretty positive direction in that point of view. I think marketing, it changes all the time. Like you're constantly having to adapt to new trends, and like 1 minute there'll be like a new feature that Steam bring out and you have to like jump on that, learn everything about that. You know, if the algorithm changes on YouTube, oh my word, you gotta research all of that. So there's so much going on all the time, which means there's never a better time to jump into marketing, because you'll always know more tomorrow than you did yesterday, which is a good thing for new people joining, because it's not like those old people at the top have anything on you. It's, you know, they don't know. They're what they knew as like golden is probably no longer relevant. So it's always a good time for younger people to jump in.
That's fantastic. Chris, sorry, can I ask how long we've been?
I don't know. This doesn't have a timer.
Oh no, okay. Because we've got 50 minutes. Chris, do you want to finish us off?
Yeah, just roll all that together. So I also took I'm really heartened to hear that everybody kind of took a slightly roundabout journey into games, because one of the things that I really love about game development just in general is the fact that it does feel a lot more open than some more traditional traditional kind of entertainment or media industries, in that kind of way. I came from a sound design background and post-production, and then I worked in sound for a long time, and moved into across broadcasting, post-production and broadcasting and radio and lots of different things, and theatre sound as well. And then I moved into voice directing about 7 years ago, doing mainly commercials and narrative stuff to start with, and then concentrating more on character voice directing about 5 years ago. And I would say that that's this kind of non-typical path into voice directing is very, very common. I've talked to, you know, like I've said, a lot of people get into game voice directing because they're writing, and they are writing for a game and they're asked to take on the voice direction part of it. Or they're a sound designer for a game or an audio director and they're asked to take on the voice direction part of it. And that's very common as well. I would say that in terms of things that have changed amongst the industry, changed about voice direction and casting direction in games, is that people are taking it more seriously now. And like I said, you know, people are asking opinion of voice directors and just valuing the job more, which is really, really great. So in terms of people wanting to get into the industry, my big thing really, I do get asked this by directors quite a lot. Oh, I'd really, really love to work in games as a director. So they're theatre directors or film directors or audio drama directors, radio drama directors or audiobook directors. And they say, I really, really I'd love to work in games. And I think the big thing for me really is, firstly, have an appreciation of games. It really, really helps if you play games. I know that sounds really obvious to all of us, but for people coming outside of the industry who think that games would be a cool thing to work in, a lot of them don't realize that actually having an understanding and appreciation of games, playing games and understanding how all the different bits fit together is incredibly helpful. Because in my day-to-day job, you know, I talk to writers, I talk to producers, I talk to publishers occasionally if the publisher has a specific opinion about what goes on, but with a specific character and how they sound, which does happen. It's slightly unusual when it does happen, but I have had publishers talk to me about how a particular character sounds because they're really invested in it, and that's brilliant. So I would say one of the things that having direction experience and directing characters, directing actors is absolutely paramount as a starting point, particularly. And we have a lot of directors that I've worked with who come from theatre backgrounds and come from screen direction backgrounds. But I think understanding how games is different, and games is interactive, and it's branching dialogue, and almost all other forms of entertainment are linear. So you sit there as a participant and you watch, you know, you don't participate, you're just watching it, and you watch a film, you watch TV, you watch theatre, you listen to an audio drama. You're not participating in it in that kind of a way. So understanding how games, what it means that a game is interactive and what a gameplay experience is, and how everything can feed into everything else. And I have a massive, you know, the more I work in games, the more appreciation I have for writing and for narrative design, which is different, and for what the sound designers do and all the different aspects of sound, and what the producers do and what the art departments do and what animation does and cinematics do. All of that feeds into my daily job, and every day I learn something different, and I go, oh, well, that's really useful to know that they do that. So I would say anybody wanting to get into it really wants to just understand games, go out there and play them, but also, you know, game people are really active on Twitter. Follow Twitter threads, follow your favorite people. I always encourage people who want to get into voice direction, voice acting for games, to follow writers, because they're going to be writing the words that you're going to be saying or directing. So it makes sense to understand what's a bark, what is gameplay dialogue, what is branching dialogue, how does that affect me as a director or an actor. So I'd say in terms of the way things have changed, the only other thing I would say is that you have to get really used to, as a voice director, particularly in current times, to not seeing your actors. And that's a massive shift for a lot of directors who come from cinema, screen acting or theatre acting. I would say I at the moment, 100% of the direction I am doing, the actors cannot see me. And about 50 to 60%, I cannot see them. It's entirely voice only. So there's a chunk of it which I'm doing for one particular, a couple of particular games where it is I can see them, but for a lot of it you are relying on voice-to-voice communication, and that is a bit weird and strange for a lot of directors or people wanting to go into director. And that's for people who are very reliant on visual, as a lot of directors do. That takes a bit of a shift as well. So I would say get tuned into voice stuff, understand that that's a thing. And the only other thing is just learn to work at speed, because games are really fast and you do not have time. Learn to work at speed, because we don't have the sort of time that you take to rehearse a film or God forbid, a theatre production. We've got 3 weeks of rehearsal before you put it on stage. It is go and go and go and go, and we have to capture 2,000 words today, you know, in this 3-hour session or what have you. So it's kind of so yeah, I'd say that's where, does that, yeah, there's some kind of sum everything up. Does that cover everything for me?
I think that's fantastic. All right, I think that's all the time we have. That was a really fascinating chat. Thank you everyone for your amazing insights. I hope people out there found this very useful. I know there are other careers talks happening at EGX Digital 2020. So please check out all the other videos, and thanks for listening to us.